Joyful sound, Jesus saves, spread the tidings all around. Jesus saves, Jesus saves.
Good afternoon. Wow, that's pretty light. Really happy to be here with you this afternoon, and I realize that, as they've been saying, this is the toughest time, and for that reason and for some other reasons, I'm going to engage you in this learning process. And what we're going to do this afternoon at first here is look at a lot of things that Jesus said and did that can teach us about cost and about multiplication. We've touched on those themes this week already, but I think there's some deeper exploration that will be really helpful to us. So I'm going to engage you in this right away. On the screen here, if you think of an aisle down the middle of the page here, and the title at the top is the stage, wherever you are is the scripture that you and those around you are going to be looking at. Does that make sense? So we need at least 6 groups on each side, and I would suggest getting in groups of 4 to 6, and so if there's more than that in a group, form a couple of groups and study and look at the same passage that you're seeing there. So, in other words, right up here, we've got Luke 14, 26 to 35. Let me read those in case they're too small for you. Luke 9, 57 to 62. Matthew 26, 6 to 13. Luke 16, 10 to 15. Matthew 13, 44 to 46. Matthew 13, 24 to 30. Now on this side, starting at the front, Matthew 13, 31 to 33. Matthew 14, 13 to 21. John 15, 1 to 8. Mark 4, 1 to 8. Mark 4, 26 to 29. John 12, 24 and 25. Does that all make sense? Just I don't really care who's in what group. I just want to make sure that all of these passages are discussed in a group, because then we're going to share with each other in a few minutes what Jesus is saying to us, or what can we see in these passages that help us to understand cost and price and value, or sometimes it's going to be more about multiplication. But either one of those things, look for those things in these passages, and then we're going to report together. So stand up if you need to, get into small clusters and get going talking. Okay, about one more minute. One more minute. Okay, if I can shut down these discussions. I know you could go longer, but we don't have super long time here. So what I'd like to do is just take time to hear briefly from each group what you see that's related to cost, value, and multiplication. So I've got a mic here. I'm gonna see if somebody from this group will say something. You're the closest to the mic.
We talked about the difference between not following Christ because of your family or sacrificing your family because of ministry. And, you know, we came to the conclusion that family is important in ministry, and the permission of family to be involved in ministry, you know, wife and children. And we didn't get much to the part about not to plan, but we just talked about how we can, you know, follow the Lord wholeheartedly, but also involve our families.
So hating your family does not mean destroying them in the process of ministry. Okay. Does anybody else do that passage? Did you guys do a different one? Did anybody do this one? Okay. Who wants to say a few words about that?
Yes, we have like Luke chapter 9 and verse 57 onward. Here we see like the cost. I will take one example when the man said that I want to follow you, but first I want to take care of my father died. And in our Middle East culture, when somebody died, the whole family, relatives, friends come together, live together like in home. Maybe there will be 60 people living, and they will console each other, spend time to grieve, cry until today is the same. So that was the value of the culture for that man. For that man, it was very important to do that, to spend time with those. But Jesus is saying, you follow me. Let the dead bury the dead. So his cost was, that is a cost to him, that Jesus was saying, don't care about your culture, about your, come out of your culture. Leave your family. There's a cost to leave the family, to follow me, which is these days, many people in the world, like if a Muslim would become a Christian, he would pay a cost. Yeah. The family would leave him, will break all kind of the first thing, the family can kill them. The second thing, if not killing, they will, break every kind of relationship. So that's the cost to follow Jesus. Yeah. And the value for him was, to follow him, to have eternal life. That's what I feel like he felt here, that I will get value to follow Jesus, but he has to pay cost to leave family, to, come out of culture. Then the multiplication. He said, go and preach, share with others about kingdom and souls, to save souls. That was multiplication of saving souls.
Thank you. Let's see, anybody else do this scripture? Matthew 26, over here.
This is the scripture where the woman pours the jar of alabaster on Jesus' head, and the disciples, like many of us, would say that that was worth a lot of money. Why did they do such a thing? And kind of the idea that we came up with was it's kind of a sign of just reckless abandonment, that, you know, God cares more about our heart than anything else. And it's her jumping all in. It's her following after Jesus. It's a sign of her great love for him, giving up a lot, everything she had possibly, you know, to follow after him.
Mm-hmm. Anybody else on that passage? Luke 16, 10 to 15. Somebody did that one?
I defer to the one behind me. Now, we talked about the importance of a track record in what we are able to handle. If we've been unfaithful in a little bit, that impacts what will be entrusted to us in the future. And I think God works that way with us as well as other people. And so we talked about the trust, being faithful, and then also God knows our hearts, and he reads between the lines, so to speak.
What people value highly is detestable in God's sight. That's an interesting one. Anybody else on that one? Okay. Did you have something to add?
Well, regarding cost, we looked a little bit at verse 13 there, where it talked about you cannot serve both God and money, and came to the conclusions that pastors are poor. No, not totally fully, but we said that we do need to be focused on God and on eternal things, and not on earthly things. And also, just one thing that came out was that in way of cost, the Pharisees, who would have had a very different value on money, ended up mocking Jesus. And so can be a cost of, if we have values that are different from the world sometimes can have that same view towards us as well.
Right. Thank you. Matthew 13, 44 to 46. Anybody do that one? Let me,
Thank you. Uses a couple kind of neat analogies of the kingdom of heaven. When you think of what the kingdom of heaven is, and when you go back to the Sermon on the Mount and see that all that Jesus talked about what the kingdom of heaven is like, and then he ties it to two pursuits. And this was kind of mentioned on Tuesday morning. You know, when you really love something, you kind of orient your life around it. And he gives us two analogies of a treasure being found and then a pearl being found. And both of these were the pursuit of the man in the story. And when we pursue not just the kingdom of heaven, but the one who gives us entrance into it, Jesus, the cost in the value of it is what we end up giving up does not even begin to match the value that we receive in the kingdom of heaven.
anybody else on that one? Matthew 13, 24 to 30. Who's got that one?
This is the parable where the wheat and the weeds grow together, and the natural response would be, hey, let's get rid of the weeds. But the master says, no, let them grow together. When you think about the cost category, one way that we might be able to approach this parable is if we're working in the master's field and we're part of seeing the crop come to fruition, it's going to be messy because the weeds are going to be there. It's going to be a lot harder than if the weeds weren't there. And if we invest in our communities, the unchurched, the unsaved, people's lives are not going to be neat and clean. And we need to be prepared for that and accept that and embrace the master's call.
It's going to be messy. Anybody else?
Yeah, I want to say one. Even though the weeds were there, the seed still multiplied.
Yeah. Multiplication happened. There was a harvest. Yeah.
I was just thinking along with that, that sometimes when we do see the weeds they're growing amidst the wheat, that we can become distracted or focused on trying to eliminate that problem or those realities. And it's not to say there isn't something to that necessarily, but in this case at least there was the encouragement to let it grow up and it gets sorted out in the end, as opposed to it being our focus of trying to sort that out or eliminate that in the midst of the growing season.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Anybody else on that one?
Comment was made about the master's anger. Just that we're sure that the master just hated the fact that these weeds were there, but he knew that the best plan to take care of that, and then encouraged his servants to do that. So.
Thanks. Matthew 13, 31 to 33. Are we up front yet, or is that? Yeah. Okay. Wow.
All right, we have the mustard seed and the leaven that was mixed in, and this is talking on the multiplication of the kingdom. And looks like some of the littlest things can have the biggest results.
Doesn't always take a lot to start. Anybody else on that one? Matthew 14, 13 to 21. Somebody got that one? Looks like it's you.
All right. Yeah, we had the one about feeding the 5,000. And the interesting part about the value is, the cost is oftentimes it's our own reputation. They committed to having the people sit down and showed them that we were going to feed them before we had seen the increase. And so sacrificing your own reputation. And then the multiplication doesn't work with zero. And so we need to give what little we do have in order for multiplication to happen. And then the value is extravagant at the end.
Yeah. The boy had to give up his loaves and fish. Yeah. Anybody else on that one? John 15, 1 to 8. Somebody here have that one?
We had quite a discussion on that. There's a heavy cost to be paid for not being connected to the vine. That disconnect is no fruit. And
that
then
disconnect? Yeah.
The pruning, a lot of times we don't want to talk about the pruning, but sometimes we sacrificed the good for what's best. And so I think that's what God wants in our lives, is for us to focus on that best.
Sacrifice the good for what's best. Anybody else on that one?
The multiplication is the fruit that comes from the process of remaining in the vine.
Yeah. Thanks. Anybody else on that? Mark 4, 1 to 8.
All of us are very familiar with the parable of the sower. And we spent a lot of time on listing the cost. And let me just list the things that we noted. Not all the seed will take. And so there will be varied results. We have to give up some seed to be able to have results. It takes time, it takes exertion of energy. It takes a commitment to the process. And one notable, interesting feature as we come into the text, Jesus began to teach by the lake. We recognized, or it was stated, that we have to give up some personal assumptions about church to minister. Because if we think we're going to do this in the church, then the lake isn't necessarily the place we would do it. So we vote for Florida.
Ocean is better than a lake, huh? Okay, anybody else on that one?
I didn't contribute much to the discussion, but we talked about that Jesus did not fault the sower for the seed that did not grow. The sower simply planted the seed, and that fell on good ground. It grew and it multiplied. And I just had to think of Paul when he said that he planted, somebody else watered, and God gave the increase. And I just had to wonder if sometimes we find ourselves doing too much or trying to do it all, trying to make sure it all happens. And I wonder if our cost is that we have to give up some of our own personal expectations of ourselves or the expectations of our congregation, that you're supposed to be doing it all. You're supposed to be planting and watering and making sure everything grows right.
Mm-hmm.
So that might be some of our cost.
Yeah. Is that all on that one? Mark 4, 26 to 29. Who's got that one? Somebody's pointing at you. Somebody's pointing at you. Wow.
I defer to my great hand in front of me.
We discussed about the fact that here the most important thing is planting the seed. And sometimes we strategize too much about how God works and how God will move in order to multiply his church. This parable says he doesn't know how it works. He's just faithful in putting the seed out there, and God does the work, and the soil produces the grain into the harvest. Farmers plant so many thousands of seed per acre for plant population, but they get many, many, many more bushels, grains of seed from that plant population. We really don't know what God can do. We never will know the extent of what we do. As long as we're faithful in planting a seed, God will give the increase. And that may be something we can see visibly, or maybe something we will never see until we get to eternity.
Mm-hmm. In verse 28, where it says all by itself, the Greek word there is where our word automatic comes from. It just happens automatically. Anybody else on that passage? Oh.
The only thing I would add to that is we talked about the fact that it doesn't say that this was this man's field that he sowed in either. So where God calls us may not be our backyard. It might be somewhere else.
Mm-hmm. You just sow the seed. Yeah. Okay. I think this is the last one. Somebody back here.
Yeah, we looked at about the wheat falling to the ground and dying. What we came up with is, what is real life for that kernel? What is the pinnacle of life for that kernel actually? It's actually multiplied. It isn't actually getting made into bread. It's actually bearing more life, bringing forth more. So I would actually just pose a question with the passage is, what do you call life? In the next verse it says, anyone who loves his life, will lose it. Everyone who hates his life will keep it to eternal life. My question is, what do you define as real life? Is it what you see in front of you, or is it in the God you know? And if it is in the God you know, then getting into the flow with God automatically produces more.
Good word. Thanks. Somebody over here? Did you say there was another group here? Yeah.
Our group talked about, when you look at this verse and talked about the cost, it's obvious that life is dying is what produces life. And so that death of a seed is what produces new life. The value of a seed is really in what it grows. So if you have a watermelon, there's value in the watermelon, but the seeds you throw out unless you're going to use it to grow more. So the value of a seed is only in what it grows. And the multiplication factor is pretty clear in this verse that one seed, can produce a whole crop and many seeds. And again, the focus on this verse is on seeds, not on the actual crop, but focus on seeds producing seeds.
Yeah. Anybody back here participate that wants to talk? Or just if you have something you want to say? I'd like us to take a couple minutes now to do a little listening exercise. If you have a piece of paper, a journal or something you can write on, we're going to take just like maybe 3 minutes, and I'd like to ask you to just listen to see what God may want to say to you from either the passage that you were discussing in your group or something else that you heard in this discussion. Just kind of be silent and say, God, what do you want me to think about right now? And then think that he'll probably give you some thoughts to think about and write those down. So I'm going to be quiet for a couple of minutes, and then we'll have another time of an opportunity for you to share some more. Okay. Let me just invite anyone who would like to share something that you're sensing God saying to you or to us from these scriptures. Anyone?
Just intrigued, I guess, by the idea that a group over here gave that 0 times anything is still 0. You know, God, in creating the world, chose to just speak something out of nothing. He could have done that with his kingdom. He could have just sort of set his kingdom down in the world and said, this is it, I'm just making this from nothing. But he's chosen to take the little bit that we have, the little bit that each of us can give, and multiply it. So I just love that picture of multiplication as the way he is building his kingdom.
And that's coming from a mathematician. That's great. Yeah. Someone else?
Like when we were listening all these communications and things, I felt God was telling me that he's not like choosing anybody, but he is choosing the people to follow him, or he wants the people to follow him who are ready to sacrifice for him. It's very important to give sacrifice when we follow Jesus Christ. This sacrifice can be a lot of different things.
Mm-hmm.
So I was just thinking about sacrifice, like also like the person to deny yourself, to deny your proudness, your many things, and then sacrificing, losing even your identity, like persecution. Any person who is ready to follow him have to be ready to sacrifice and to bear the things for him.
Right.
Like persecution, losing homes, like the homes born in Pakistan, India, many countries, the Christian homes, the other people come and burn. In one night, 100 homes, they were burnt in 2013 in Pakistan, in my city. So people are killed. December 17, last year, December 17, 1 week before the Christmas, people were worshiping in the church and the terrorists came, they blast bombs, 9 people died there, 58 went to hospital in bad condition. So God is looking for the people who are ready to follow him until death.
Right.
Ready for everything.
What came to my mind was what Randy said yesterday about think differently.
Yeah.
Jesus wants us to think the way he thinks.
Think differently. Yeah.
As we were talking about the value of souls and multiplication, and the person who bought a whole field to find a pearl, value is determined by the person who wants the thing or person that is valued. Go to an auction, I see something I want to buy, I'll pay till I get it. You understand what I'm saying? God valued us so much. He paid the ultimate price. Are we willing to sacrifice, as our brother said, to pay the ultimate price to bring souls into the kingdom?
Yeah.
Do we value people that much?
And actually, do we value ourselves that much? Because we gain life. Yeah.
Thank you, brother from Pakistan, for sharing. The word sacrifice was also one that I wrote down. This is just my reflections on what I was personally hearing from the Lord. Put all of your heart and resources into building the kingdom. Be willing to sacrifice to the point of death now, and there will be no limit to the life I will bring in eternity. The phrase, give all, just give all that I have, give all that we have as a conference, as churches, as pastors, in the kingdom now to sow that, even if it feels like a death at the time, there'll be no limit to the life that God will bring from that in eternity.
Just thinking about the mustard seed again, and what God's been pressing on me is that it is those little things that make the biggest impact. And so be faithful. I know as a pastor, you know, I think, well, if I could be another Billy Graham or go speak at a big conference, or, you know, start some huge outreach ministry that reaches thousands. And I think the way the kingdom works is we are to be faithful. And it may be walking next door, it may be making a pie, maybe giving a hug, maybe a mentor, being a mentor. Just these small little things can make this huge eternal difference in the kingdom. Like the smallest seed in the garden can make the biggest tree. And just be faithful with the things that are in front of us. That's what we're called to be in the kingdom.
Great. Thanks.
Just several thoughts here that I felt impressed upon me is, and I was in the mustard seed verse as well, but everything involving God, his plan, purpose, his power, brings life that leads to exponential multiplication. You know, whether it's the loaves and fishes, whether it's anything that he does. The song, the great hymn, little is much when God is in it.
Yeah. It's like it's just a natural thing when God is, it's what happens. Yeah.
In the feudal days, you know, the Lord could come into the vassal's home, and if he liked a table or a chair or whatever, pick it up. You know, everything was the Lord's. They belonged to the Lord. So we talk about sacrifice, but if we're the Lord's, we're his. We don't give anything up. We've already died to self to come to Christ. And so some of the thoughts that came to me here is that without God's help, we can't do anything. If we follow him prayerfully, then he will lead us. He'll provide whatever resources are needed. He'll use our spiritual gifts, which he's given to us, to bring him honor. He'll bless others as well as ourselves, because it's not about us. But he does choose to use us. But we use this term sacrifice, and I know what we mean by it, but at the same time, you know, the gift of martyrdom is only used once, and it's a gift. And God is the one that dispenses the spiritual gifts, the Holy Spirit.
Yeah. One or two more back here.
The parable of the wheat and tares, it occurred to me that tares were to grow up with the wheat, and I don't know exactly what tares were. Did they have grain heads of some kind or whatever? But at the end, the tares were to be separated out, and only the wheat gathered as harvest. And the tendency that we might have is to increase our harvest by harvesting the tares with the wheat. But they need to be separated out.
Yeah. So a hand over here.
Thank you. I'm just sitting here wondering, when we have an evangelistic thrust in one of our meetings and maybe someone comes forward to receive Christ, I wonder why I know most of us would not say to that individual, are you willing to give up everything for Jesus Christ? As a prelude to praying with them to receive Christ. And most of us, I think, are more in the mindset, well, we're conveying often just a little baby step over here to give your life to Christ. But yet, Christ isn't asking that. Christ is really asking of us, any new believer, any person coming to him, to be able to be willing to give everything to him. And the interesting thing is, he often doesn't require exactly everything. I know when I became a Christian, I didn't have to sell my 10-speed bicycle. I mean, I still had my bicycle. But my heart was, when I came to the Lord, Lord, anything you want of me, I'm willing to leave anything for you. And I think that we need to really, truly convey that to, we're doing a great disservice to any potential new believer if we're not conveying the cost of discipleship.
Yeah. It strikes me that that's kind of related to what Randy said yesterday, then also about, it's also not just going from a good life to a better life, it's going from death to true life. And so it costs everything, but we gain everything. Yeah. I don't have very much time. I wanted to just say a few sort of closing things here. I know that when I was a pastor in Flint, Michigan, before I moved to Columbus to work at RMM, there were times when I felt really tired of all of the things coming at me as a pastor. And it seemed to me that I simply had to pick what I felt like was important and leave a whole bunch of other essential things undone. I'm realizing that there's a chance that some, maybe even many of you, are here this week and hear us all talking about multiplying churches and planting and all of that, and it's kind of like, I mean, that sounds great, but I got nothing. I would just like to give a few, I call them my top 7. You can take them or leave them. There's some pieces that I think actually are not going to wear you out further. They're going to be life-giving ultimately. And I'd also say these are 7 things that I think are important in multiplication, but you're going to have to, you might pick none or hopefully one or whatever you feel like God is drawing you to. But I do feel like these are some life-giving principles. Number 1, pray the multiply prayer. This is the one that Randy talked about yesterday. I currently have my phone set to give me an alarm at 10:02. As Randy suggested, I've been doing that for a couple of years now, and I am convinced that I'm seeing results of that prayer. And I'm not about to stop. Just kind of over lunch, before I came up here and I was praying about this, I felt like this maybe was an idea from God. It's something I'm going to do, and I would actually invite you to join me. I think I'm going to change my alarm to 11:59. And the reason that I felt like God was saying that was, this is the 11th hour. We've just adopted one of our commitments as CMC is that it's urgent. There's urgency. And when I start praying this prayer at 11:59, it's going to remind me that this is serious business. This is not just, oh, well, whenever this happens, it'll be great. It's like, it's time. We don't have much time. They don't have much time. God continues to be patient with the church because he's not willing that anyone out there that's not in the church perishes. But it's 11:59. So you can do what you want with that, but I would encourage you to find a time, 10:02. You can also choose 9:38, because if you go to Matthew, that's where that same prayer is. But I think I'm going to go with 11:59 for a while and pray that prayer then. Ask the Lord of the harvest to send workers into the harvest field. that doesn't even quite say it as strongly as Jesus said it. I mean, the English is a little weak there. It's actually like beg the Lord of the harvest to propel workers into the harvest, like thrust them out there, get them in the field now. We have not only the privilege and the right, but we have the responsibility to be praying that prayer. And there's all kinds of ways to pray that. I mean, I wouldn't suggest that you just, when your alarm goes off, you say, oh, Lord of the harvest, send workers in the harvest. Got that done. Like, ask God even how to pray that. Say, God, how do you want me to ask you to do this? And then, here am I, send me. I think you'll find that God's going to answer that prayer. It doesn't take a lot of time. It's not going to wear you out. It's going to be blessing to you. Number 2, teach like a rabbi. Study Jesus and how he taught. Life on life with a few key people. Focus on interactive learning situations. Somebody talked yesterday, I can't remember what the context was, they mentioned Eutychus falling asleep when Paul was preaching so long. A lot of us relate to that, like we've done that. We've fallen asleep when somebody was preaching too long. I'm not convinced that that was a very typical situation. It was in the middle of the night because Paul was leaving the next day. And actually, again, the Greek word behind preaching or talking was dialogue. I'm guessing Paul did more talking than anyone else, I don't know. But he was having an interactive conversation with those leaders about issues that they were facing. He was teaching them dialogically. I think it's critically important. I was at the C2C conference a year ago in Vancouver, and one of the speakers there said something that has just been ringing in my ear ever since. He asked the question, why does every teacher hate what every pastor loves? What he's talking about is class size. You go to schools and they're saying, they put 30 kids in my room. I can't teach 30 kids. I got to have 17 or 18. That's the ideal class size. Think about what that means. Listen to Jesus. Jesus is the head of the church. He really is. Like, he speaks to us today through the word, through the rhema of the Spirit. Listen. As Randy said, he's going to give us the strategies that we need to go from 4 days to 4 hours. I fully believe that Randy's exactly right. We're going to think differently, and we're going to see prayer as the work, and we're going to be hearing strategies and things to do from Jesus that are going to change everything. We can't miss that step. Whoops. Number 4, read 5Q. You all had a chance to get one of those. If you didn't get one yet, we have more. Let me just say this. I think this is important stuff, but if you're like me, Alan Hirsch is kind of a verbose and difficult person to read through. I would actually like to invite some of you who are really good readers and disseminators to read that stuff and send some summaries to us so that the rest of us can actually understand what Alan Hirsch is saying. It's powerful stuff. I mean, I have read a bunch of his work, and I think this is an incredibly important concept that he's bringing to the church these days. But I'm also a little afraid that a bunch of us are going to head into that book and say, I can't access this. We need to access the concept. So let's make it happen one way or another. Number 5, simplify everything. Mustard seeds. The more we can simplify, the more reproducible things become. Complex things reproduce slowly. Simple things reproduce more rapidly. Engage everyone. I believe that if we are going to see a movement to Jesus that CMC is a part of, it's going to have to be all hands on deck. It really is. Like, it's got to be out at the fingertips, not just, 20% of the people doing 80% of the work. We've got to find ways, by listening to Jesus, to engage everyone. Young, old, men, women, children. It's happening. Where there are movements to Jesus, people are engaged. It's not just for a few key leaders. Leaders are important, but getting it to the fingertips is what the leaders have to be doing. And number 7, think like a missionary. I'll never forget, probably 30 years ago, when I heard someone say, why is it that when we go to mission fields, we do everything we can to understand them, to adapt to their culture where that's appropriate, and we're studying the culture so that we can bring them to Jesus. Our posture here at home is, man, those people are kind of nasty out there. There's a lot of dark things that we've got to protect ourselves from. Let's turn away from that stuff and focus on the good things that we've got going. It's a totally different posture. And another thing I'm convinced of is that if we're going to multiply, we're going to have to think like missionaries think. How can we engage with the lost around us in meaningful ways so that they see that we're different and not just weird? They see that we have something that they want. Many times we don't even know how to communicate that because we don't know them. We've separated ourselves. I think these are a few key things that we can do to move toward multiplication. And then we can just watch what God does. His yoke is easy and his burden is light. If it's feeling heavy to you, rethink it. It's not heavy, it's costly. And I want to be in. Let's pray. Father, thank you so much for what you are doing in our hearts this week as we've come to you and to your word, as we've listened to others who are sharing their hearts with us. We ask you to propel us into the harvest. Amen.
Good afternoon. Apologies in advance for the abrupt change of theme and feel, but we have no choice. I will read part of my report. Life on the campus of RBC has been framed during the past 2 months by the sounds and the sight of the old gym building coming down. Most of the initial demolition happened while students were at home for Christmas, but the process has continued into the new year. Like many other alumni, those of us who work there have a lot of memories of those old spaces. We remember friends we made and sometimes exactly where we met them. We remember conversations in the old cafeteria or on the stairs to the gym. We remember volleyball and basketball games in the gym, and if we're old enough, we might even remember large public gatherings in that gym. I probably have as many memories from that old building as anybody does. I remember living briefly in the crow's nest, one of those little rooms above the old stage, with my parents during one of the very first years that classes were held in Rosedale. I remember choir programs in that old gym in the 1960s. I remember a student production of A Christmas Carol performed on the gym stage. My first date with Dawn was to a Shiloh Mennonite Church youth group Christmas banquet in the RBC cafeteria, and on and on and on. So we wondered how campus would feel as the old building came down. The short answer is, feels great. But what about all those memories? As Phil Weber has never tired of reminding us, we still have the memories, at least for a while yet, until we don't have any memories. We've been in the new building just over a year, and it seems that every few weeks there's a new reminder of what a blessing it is and how quickly we've become accustomed to using it. Late last fall, we hosted a parents' dinner on the weekend of our drama production, and as I looked around that beautiful gathering, it was hard to imagine holding it in that old space. At Christmas time, this past Christmas, we hosted churches from the area for our annual Christmas celebration, and the new cafeteria again provided an ideal setting for fellowship, for cookies and drinks after the singing in the chapel had ended. Just a few weeks ago, we co-hosted, along with Shekinah Christian School near Plain City, the first of its kind Rosedale Invitational Basketball Tournament. Teams from Christian schools as far away as Arthur, Illinois and Greenwood, Delaware came for a weekend of competition. It was really satisfying for me to see campus swarming with high school kids who had little idea how impossible that event would have been just a year ago. Just last weekend, a church from Urbana, Ohio, where one of our bridge interns spent a year working with the youth program, used the RBC campus for a gathering that brought together 160 youth from churches in the Urbana area for a weekend of challenge and fellowship. I thought you might enjoy a short glimpse into the changes that have taken place. So in this video that we're about to watch, you'll see pictures of the old building coming down, but you'll also see some pictures of life unfolding in the new. We expect to make one last draw and finalize the mortgage on our new building within the next several months. Assuming that we don't receive major contributions between now and then, which of course we're very open to, it looks like we'll end up with a mortgage of $1.72 million. That will translate into monthly payments of nearly $10,000. You might ask, where will that money come from? And even if you don't ask that, we do. At its meeting last November, the RBC board discussed a two-pronged strategy to address this debt. First, solicit contributions from businesses to cover mortgage payments in 2018. And then second, once that was done, invite our alumni to make contributions which could go directly to paying down the principal on the loan balance. I'm happy to report that as of this week, the first part of that strategy is in place. We have funds on hand or pledged to cover mortgage payments for the rest of calendar year 2018, which means that the second part can be launched within the next few weeks. And by the way, let me just say how deeply grateful I am for the board of Rosedale Bible College that carries a vision for this school in their hearts. Their work, which is challenging work, unfolds usually behind the scenes, and they do an amazing job. So for those of you who are still here from the RBC board, thanks. Can I make two suggestions to this group of pastors and leaders? If you think of business people in your area that ought to be invited to contribute to this effort, please let me or a board member know who they are. And second, if you're the leader of a church that doesn't contribute to RBC on a regular basis, would you consider making a special contribution sometime this year toward the new building? That would be both a help and an encouragement to us. You've heard a lot about the new building today and over the past few years, and I don't actually apologize for that. However, once it's paid for, we'll probably just stop talking about it so much. So enjoy it while it lasts. RBC's mission does not revolve around buildings. It revolves around students. And we're grateful for each one whom God has led to our campus over the past years, and we love watching how God uses them when they go on to other places and do other things. But we live always at Rosedale with the awareness that our environment is much like a current against which we are swimming, a current that seems to be strengthening sometimes rather than weakening. The total number of high school grads continues to decline nationally. The number of educational options continues to expand. The to come to Rosedale. And thanks always for your encouragement and your prayers. I'd like to tell you about a student whose life has been shaped recently by studying at RBC. I first met Brad Hartzler online. which is an odd way to say it, I suppose. Actually, he was a member of the only RBC class that I ever taught in an online format. And it turned out to be the last course that we offered online, but I don't think it was completely my fault. In any case, that interaction resulted in Brad coming to Rosedale and enrolling in the regular on-campus program. It turns out that Brad's here this afternoon. Would you come on up, Brad? He just got off work. He told me he would possibly be a little dusty and dirty, but I'd like to let you hear him reflect just a little bit on the time that he spent at RBC. Come on up here. I think, is this handheld mic on? Hold. It will be. It is. Even your glasses are dusty, Brad.
Yeah, a little bit.
So, when were you a student at RBC?
I was a student at RBC from the fall of 2012 and then graduated in the spring of 2014.
And what were you doing before coming to RBC, and what did you do after studied at RBC?
Right before, I had taken the online class, and then before that I was working at a cabinet shop about 2 minutes that way for a little over 2 years. And then before that I was working on a dairy farm right out of high school. And yeah, took the class, really enjoyed it. And after praying about it, decided that RBC would be a really good fit, and was there for 2 years. And after that, God led me to the REACH program, and I was in that from the fall of 2014, 1 term in Canada, and then went back a 2nd term to Canada again, and got home May of 2016.
Would you tell this group a little bit about what it was about your time at Rosedale that was important or significant for you?
There are so many things that I could comment on. The profs are, the setting at Rosedale is so unique versus, say, like Penn State or the bigger colleges, in that the student to professor ratio is, I guess, lower. And that makes for a significant opportunity for interaction between the professors and the students. And that meant so much to me throughout my time there. There was something really unique and really special about being able to go knock on my professor's door and actually go in and sit down and talk to them. And some of the time, it had nothing to do with class. I remember around finals time, I spent a lot of time in Phil Weber's office on study breaks. He would be grading papers. I would be studying for a final, and I'd go knock on his door and say, Phil, are you tired of grading for a little bit? Yeah, come in and sit down. So that meant a lot. And when I look back at RBC, that's one of the major things that sticks out to me. It's not an academically super easy school, and that's a good thing. And that prepared me well for Lancaster Bible. That's something I just got done with after coming back from REACH. I finished a bachelor's degree through LBC online, and that the difficulty level or the quality, the academic quality, was very, very similar to Rosedale. So it prepared me well for that. The spiritual environment on campus of professors taking interest in the academic life, but also the spiritual life of students, the constant kind of atmosphere of prayer in the student body also meant a lot. And I have really good friends that I still keep in contact with from RBC.
So if you could leave a message with CMC pastors, leaders about RBC, what would you want to tell them?
I think mainly I would want to say make it an option, or make sure that it is known as an option. You know, like you were saying, there's a
a very big push, and yeah, I definitely see it too. You know, maybe look at colleges where all your credits are going to transfer, or the financial gap will be minimal. And those are all good things, but at the same time, the investment in a year or even a semester at RBC is so worth it. Even if all the credits don't transfer, it's so worth it. And yeah, I would say let youth know that it's an option, but it's a legitimate option, and it's a good option. And I know for me, when I talk to people about it, there's always this tension of, I really, really want to see people go, but not trying to make it sound like if you want to follow God, you will go to RBC. but making it an option and saying, you know, this is just as legitimate as any other school choice that you may make.
Thank you for sharing with us. One of the really special things for me about being at RBC is getting to watch people's lives develop as they come and study and then go on and do other things, and then bumping into them later. I saw Brad last evening and was thinking about this afternoon and thought, I wonder if Brad would be willing to, you know, just comment about his time at RBC. And so I said, you know, Brad, what do you think? Like, I'm doing this RBC report. I wish I had a video of his eyes kind of lighting up and his face lighting up, and he said, I'd love to. So thanks for being willing to talk about your time there. I'm really glad that Rosedale Bible College is part of a group of believers committed to maturing and multiplying churches. From what I can tell, both of those impulses are pretty easy to find in RBC's DNA right from the start, though of course the vocabulary and the forms and the expressions of those impulses have changed a lot over the years and continue to change. The school was founded by people who wanted a place that would nurture maturity in young people. So they taught the Bible. But they also wanted a program that would grow a vision of a church that reaches the world. That's why in 1952, the very first year that the school met in Berlin, Ohio, we offered a course called Biblical Basis for Missions. We went through the old Gospel Star yearbooks from the first decade of the school's life, where we had course lists, course descriptions. Listen to this list of courses offered during the first decade at Berlin, Ohio, before the move to Rosedale. Personal evangelism, South American missions, Central American missions, Latin American missions. Not quite sure how that all got divided up. Rural missions, city missions, African missions, Indian missions, Chinese and Japanese missions, progress of worldwide missions. Later on, the courses would have other names, like congregational evangelism and church planting, introduction to missions, world religions, introduction to Islam. And that's in addition to courses like devotional life, deeper life, spiritual formation. So as CMC focuses in a fresh way on a vision that calls us to mature and multiply churches locally and globally, at RBC we're eager to do whatever we can to help us fulfill both parts of that vision. Last summer, Dawn and I decided to join a group of young adults who wanted to start a church in Columbus, Ohio. Most of them were RBC alums, And many of them were also Bridge alumni, the RBC program Bridge, which is a combination of study and internship, who were already living and working in Columbus. They decided that since they were already functioning a lot like a little church, they should perhaps make it more formal and invite other people to join them. Olentangy Mennonite Church was born. Dawn and I are the only regular participants who don't live in Columbus. And by the way, Jerry and Donna Souter are also involved at Olentangy as of New Year's. And we've loved watching the way this project has pushed a bunch of 20-somethings into positions of leadership and responsibility that they would almost certainly not have in a more established congregation. What will OMC, as we usually call it, look like in 5 years? Nobody knows. But in the meantime, it's a privilege to be involved in one of the places that marks new energy, new vision, and is inviting the rising generation to help lead the way into uncharted territories of maturing and multiplying. I've invited Jeremy Miller, one of our board members, to reflect just a little bit further on this mature and multiply theme, and then to bring this RBC report to a close. Jeremy.
Thank you, John. I'm Jeremy Miller and serve on the board at RBC, and I wanted to share with you just from our hearts, especially as board members, administration, we love and affirm what God is speaking into this conference. The vision to mature and multiply, and the various things that go with that, and even this weekend, the move of God amongst us. I think even if you don't know quite what God's going to do, there's a certain excitement and anticipation knowing that God really is up to something. And what you also need to know is that the RBC board and administration is excited about partnering with MCA, that's the church I pastor, with CMC, in helping sort of facilitate what God's doing. And we don't quite know what all that is. You should know that over the last year, in fact, last May, we held specific strategic planning meetings with Conrad Carnegie, looking for God and asking God for a vision for RBC and to give us direction, clear direction as a school. And the vision that was given and that we have embraced is that God is calling RBC to become a primary learning destination for preparing kingdom workers. We long to be the place that partners with you as churches to help prepare workers that God is sending out into various places, to help prepare workers that God is bringing back to your churches. And so part of the thing that I want to express to you on behalf of the board and administration at RBC is we are looking to partner with you. I know for some of you, RBC has sort of been a distant reality that you hear reports on twice a year. But other than that, some of you haven't had students ever attend there. And maybe you're not quite sure how RBC even fits in with your congregation. It's a nice thing that apparently other students go do. But I want you to know that we want to engage you. We see this vision as really big, and we're trying to think bigger. What does God have for us to help you and to help this conference mature and multiply? And so this is an invitation to engage, to begin to engage the board, to begin to engage administration. How do we partner with you? One of the things we care deeply about. And I know it's late, and I know you're eager to get to whatever you're going to get to next. But as I was thinking about the way we could end this report, thinking about the things we heard yesterday, being challenged again that anything that comes out of this mature and multiply vision is really birthed and produced by the Spirit of God. And we spent this morning, I was so blessed in our pastor's meeting, praying about things that we weren't quite sure how to resolve, that we weren't quite sure how to answer. I know many of you were there. My spirit was blessed. And I felt compelled to ask you as a body to pray for RBC. If we could spend the next couple of minutes praying and asking God, what is it, Father, that you have for this school? How is it that you want RBC to participate in this move of God to mature and multiply? Would it be all right to just come before the Father with our hands open and see if the Lord has a word for us and ask the Lord to use this institution for His glory in our conference? Could we end by doing that this afternoon? So maybe we could divide up into small groups as we did this morning and pray. And I invite you to pray for our churches, for RBC, for CMC, and how that all connects together. Let's do that, and I'll close in a moment.